Good afternoon, hello, and welcome to today's webinar on charitable planning to engage the next generation. My name is Steve Schwanke. I am a charitable planning specialist with Fidelity Charitable, and I'm happy to serve as your host today for today's discussion. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to share a few housekeeping notes to maximize your participation. For optimal viewing and participation, please go ahead and disable any pop-up blockers on your computer. Also, should you need technical assistance such as sound not working properly, or if you're experiencing a frozen screen, as a best practice, we suggest that you first refresh your browser and limit the number of background applications running on your computer. If that does not resolve the issue, please refer to the reminder email you received this morning, which lists a technical hotline. If you are seeking CFP or IMCA-CE credit, you will be asked to provide your ID number in the event survey made available at the end of this session. Please remember that you must remain online for the duration of today's event in order to receive CE credit. We will have some time at the end of the presentation for a question and answer session. You can submit text questions at any time. If you have questions as we go through the content, please feel free to write them in the Q&A box located on the right corner of your screen. They will be directed to all panelists. We will do our best to answer all questions in the time allotted. If we do not address your question, a member of the Fidelity Charitable team will follow up with you directly in the next several days. So let's move on to today's session. With an aging demographic and a changing wealth landscape, it is becoming increasingly important to you, a trusted advisor, to build client relationships across generations within a family. Philanthropy is well suited to help initiate meaningful dialogue between generations that will also serve to deepen relationships with current and future clients. Our expert speakers will provide key insight on how initiating a discussion about transitioning philanthropy from one generation to the next can enhance your business. With that, I'd like to introduce our guest speakers for today's call. Welcome, Frank Hogan, Senior Vice President and Investment Advisor at UBS Private Wealth Management, specializing in ultra-high net worth clients based in Houston, Texas. And welcome to Kita Matsumoto. Kita is a Senior Relationship Manager for the Private Donor Group here at Fidelity Charitable. He is responsible for helping high net worth donors and their advisors with innovative strategies to maximize their philanthropic goals with their Fidelity Charitable Donor Advice Fund. Frank and Kita, we're excited to have you here with us. I want to thank you again for your time today. With this, Kita, I'll hand it over to you to kick off with some charitable strategies to engage the next generation.
Steve, thank you very much, and thank you very much to all the participants who joined us today, and thank you especially to Frank Hogan for taking time out of his day to participate as a speaker in today's session. Look forward to having this discussion, and first wanted to really start off by talking a little bit about some two key stats. One is that we've got a significant shift of wealth that's underway. So it's estimated that over the next 35 years, $59 trillion will be transferred to heirs as part of the greatest wealth transfer in U.S. history. Furthermore, another stat that I'd like to share with you is that 98% of people who inherit money are deciding to move it away from their parents, financial advisors. So with these two statistics, it's presenting both an opportunity and a risk for the advisors who serve these donors, these clients. So how can advisors proactively mitigate the risk of next generation of client families moving away and also potentially capitalizing on the opportunity presented to them with this significant wealth transfer? Today we'd like to talk about philanthropy as being that key differentiator and the solution to really capitalizing on the wealth transfer as well as the mitigation of risk. So with philanthropy, it's a real easy way to engage your clients on that $59 trillion wealth transfer. In fact, 9 out of 10 families are discussing giving, or they're giving plans with their families at least once a year. That's a significant number. And nearly 1 in 5 families are actually having those discussions more than 5 times a year. So every quarter, if not more. Furthermore, nearly half of clients are actually saying that they want to involve their family in those planning discussions with their advisors. So as you can see here, there is an opportunity, and philanthropy can play a key role in that. So why philanthropy, and more specifically, why family philanthropy? And the reason is because family philanthropy helps to meet a clear client need, it helps to differentiate you and your business, and it helps to grow your business. It's because 98% of high net worth donors are actually contributing to charity annually, and the majority of these clients are looking to you for your help. However, 14% of advisors are actually offering charitable planning advice. So, as you can see here, family philanthropy is a real driver of a differentiator of your business, as well as helping to really provide value to the clients that you're working with. Charitable planning is certainly part of holistic planning. And so, Frank, as you and I are talking today, I wanted to ask you, as you're having those planning conversations with your clients, how do you integrate charitable planning and charitable giving into those conversations?
Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. I must say, when I look at this first statistic, I saw this at a conference recently, the 98% of children who effectively ditched their parents' advisor. $59 trillion is such a huge number. I don't think my brain is capable of getting its head wrapped around that number, but I can tell you 98% of people leaving, that I understand. And so I think I was at a conference with UBS, and the vast majority of advisors saw that, and I have to be honest, I mean, there was a significant silence that came over everyone, because I think people really, that resonated, because we're all guilty of potentially dismissing that next generation. And so I think what this clearly illustrates is there's a huge transition that's going to take place. Everyone on this call and everyone in my office is guilty of this, of really neglecting potentially that next generation. And so it's, how do you engage the next generation? So to answer your question, I think we start with my team. I'll give you a little bit of background on our team. Team of 7 based in Houston. Vast majority of what we do is work with families who've typically had a monetization event of some size, hopefully, and so we ideally work with them prior to the actual transaction, but part of that is a very holistic approach. And I think what we found is when you can pierce through the initial discussion of stocks and bonds, what you ultimately find is what we're trying to do is create solutions. And so we engage the client on philanthropy as one of those solutions. Not only objectively is it beneficial from a tax perspective, but I think more so it helps them engage that next generation via education and the creation of mission statements and that sort of thing. But it really gets to what are we trying to do for them? And yeah, we're trying to make money for them, but for what purpose? And it many times involves, the children. What do they want for their children? Do they want to give them money or not give them money? And you start to get to those questions, and I think what you find is you develop a deeper relationship. So we start at the beginning as, philanthropy as a component of that discussion.
Great. Thank you, Frank. So as we move on today, really what we want to highlight is that charitable planning really allows you as the advisor to not only deepen those existing client relationships, but it allows you to reach the next generation, help your clients' families learn about financial management, and it also helps to create a philanthropic legacy for your client that spans multiple generations. So we want to be able to share some tips and some thoughts that you could take away so you can start to incorporate charitable planning into your conversations. So with that said, how can you help your clients understand the benefits of creating a family giving plan? I think first and foremost, by doing so, you're helping to cultivate family values. You're also helping to perpetuate their legacy. You're helping to strengthen family relationships within and across generations, as well as across geographies. And there's tremendous learning and growth for the next generation that you can provide. So 4 tips that we wanted to share with you today are, first, tip number 1, zero in on client values. Tip number 2, ask clients about their families. Tip number 3, get introduced to the family. And then tip number 4, keep the lines of communication open with the family. And so, Frank, with those tips, do any of them, if not maybe all of them, resonate with you in terms of the discussions you're having with your clients?
They do, and I think, you know, it's funny. I'm sort of going through the process of planning a summer vacation, and I'm laughing because I've read somewhere that I've spent like 2 days going through this, and what they say is that people spend more time planning their summer vacation than they do their lives, the average person, which is probably true for me as well, and my wife and our family. But you know, I was looking at the slide, cultivating family values. These are things that everybody wants to do, I think, innately. They oftentimes, because of life getting in the way, they don't spend the time doing that, much like you're spending time on your summer vacation and not your life. So what I think what we try and do is use this as a vehicle that, you know, enables those discussions. So we do, at the very beginning, as I said, you know, and I think I do this anyway, which is just asking people generally about their family, about are they married, do they have children, do they have grandchildren, are they charitably inclined? And it's a very natural discussion. I tell them about, you know, I have 4 children, and I give, you know, to various charities, you know, and so I think it's a very natural dialogue. But what it does is, from the very beginning, when you ask, do you typically, you know, are you charitable? Oftentimes the answer is yes, and so then we'll ask them the subsequent question of, well, you know, in what way do you give? And very oftentimes, well, I give to my church, or I give to my college, or something like that. So then we ask, well, in what manner do you contribute? Do you just give cash and write a check? And most of the time the answer is yes, and I'm as guilty of that as anyone because of just the simplicity and the ease of use. But from that very beginning, we say, you know, there's a manner in which you can give, which is just more tax efficient, which is essentially to contribute low basis stocks that you may have, and oftentimes someone will have some low basis stock. And so, you know, most of the people on this call probably understand this, but typically, you know, essentially what you're doing is foregoing the capital gain that you will ultimately have to pay on that equity. So it's very simple, but I think just it shows that you're thinking a little bit differently, you know, in a very minute way, how you can help them save some tax money, but how this, you know, philanthropic component is part of the discussion very early.
Great.
The other thing I'll just mention is, you know, in terms of keeping lines open of communication with the family, similarly, all parents want to have a better relationship with their kids. They want to have ongoing dialogue with the kids. Similarly, you know, it's hard to find a vehicle for these broad discussions of family mission and these grand plans of creating that. The dialogue around a foundation, potentially, it just enables you to have that dialogue. Maybe it's once a quarter or once a year, but there's a framework around it where you can really have those discussions of, you know, what are we about? What's the purpose of this capital, and what do we want to do? So, you know, yet again, it's just nothing other than you're just providing a vehicle for discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Frank. In addition to these 4 tips that we just shared, also wanted to share a 5th tip. And really what it is if your clients are looking for some help researching nonprofits or comparing nonprofits, there are some free services out there such as Charity Navigator. There's also an organization called give.org, which is part of the Better Business Bureau. And then finally, GuideStar. Some of you may be familiar with GuideStar, but it essentially provides financial information, disclosures around the 1.2 million plus public charities that are out there in existence, as well as private foundations. So in addition to that, just wanted to share that Charity Navigator is one of those sites that provides, thousands of charities, and it's similar to a Morningstar, essentially providing transparency into many of these organizations that your clients may be supporting. It doesn't provide the universe like GuideStar might in terms of the 1.2 million plus, but Charity Navigator does narrow down and provide ratings and qualitative information as well as quantitative about each organization. So that could be a resource where you can help your clients. So moving on to the next section, wanted to just pause there, and Steve, I think you were going to take us through the client scenarios.
Yes, I definitely would love to talk a little bit more about some of these client scenarios that all of the advisors on the call today might be going through currently in their practices. And I also want to say what staggering statistics you've shared with us about the $59 trillion as well as the 98%. It's a very impactful conversation to have with your clients. Now, before we kind of take some of the questions from our listeners, I'd love to kind of go through a few of these potential client scenarios. And I would love to start out with you, Frank. And you mentioned earlier that you start very early on with the philanthropic conversation. But I wanted to see if maybe in your experience, maybe you've had clients that you might have inherited, or maybe you've clients you've had for a long time. How do you kind of bring up the charitable conversation at that point in time?
It's part of the annual review process of one of the questions we put is to ask them about philanthropy, really more so from a estate planning perspective. We certainly use that as a tool, and I'll give this full disclosure. I want to be very careful. I'm not a tax advisor. I don't give tax advice. UBS doesn't give tax advice, but we do try and position ourselves with the client's advisors, tax advisors and otherwise, to get away from the hand-to-hand combat of day-to-day financial performance. And the more you, like I said, the more you can get towards a deeper relationship with the client and try and find out, what are we ultimately working towards here? What is the ultimate goal? Is it peace of mind? Is it retirement? Is it benefiting the kids? Is it giving to charity? And so in asking that question each year, we get some answers there about their charitable inclination. And so from a estate planning perspective, I can just tell you, so I'm in Houston, over the last, let's call it 8 or 9 years, there's been many a time when we've said, hey, client, you can essentially do 4 things. You can spend all this money, which you're never going to do. You can give it to your children, you can give it to the IRS or the Treasury, or you can give it to charity. And you make it very simple. You really only have 3 arrows in the quiver there, which are charity, IRS, and kids. And I have found, and I think we all have, that clients are very hesitant to just drop it in the kid's lap. Very interesting. I think many have actually held back, and I don't know if that's driven by Bill Gates or others, but I think there's a lot that I think is ultimately going to be going to charity. And so really it's just from an annual dialogue, and it's really geared more towards the estate planning discussion. How are they thinking about it, and has there been any change to their charitable inclinations, et cetera?
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like you've really kind of boiled it down into that simple process that does create that valued impact with the clients, and to make sure that you are kind of you're creating that plan that really meets their goals and objectives. Now, Keita, I would love to ask the same question to you as to some of the advisors that you've worked with over the years. Have you found a specific time in which they have kind of waited, or maybe have they already and ultimately have jumped into the charitable planning conversation right from the beginning?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Steve, and I'm certainly realizing that many of the advisors that I've been working with are incorporating charitable planning discussions into those conversations. Whether it's, as Frank said, to figure out the how are you giving, are you using checkbooks, are you using a private foundation, and oftentimes in those conversations we're finding out that they may already have established vehicles that they're using, and sometimes it's multiple vehicles, a private foundation with a donor-advised fund, maybe sometimes a private operating foundation with a private non-operating foundation, and some with multiple donor-advised funds, a national donor-advised fund complemented by a community foundation donor-advised fund. So certainly finding that a lot of the advisors are incorporating those, but I have run across situations where it hasn't been incorporated as well. So those are the situations where it may be coming a little bit later in those relationships, and then the advisors realizing, hey, you know, I need to be having these conversations, and after seeing the impact that a philanthropic conversation can have, they've then instituted it into their process.
Well, it sounds like it's all about initially asking the right questions. How have you done this in the past? What are your goals with regards to philanthropy? As well as trying to find that right balance and that right vehicle. So have you actually seen recently about how people have utilized both private foundations as well as donor-advised funds to meet their needs?
I have, and in fact, many of the donors that and families that I work with are using multiple vehicles, and the reasons are varied. Some may use those private foundations in conjunction with a donor-advised fund because they see the value in a donor-advised fund structured as a public charity, which provides even more advantages from a tax perspective. Whereas, so for example, if you're contributing privately held assets, a privately held C Corp, S Corp, limited partnership interest, contributing those same assets to a private foundation, you would be subject to cost basis. Whereas that same asset being contributed to a public charity, like a donor-advised fund, the donor would be eligible potentially for a fair market value deduction. And with many of these assets, the cost basis is really negligible, so it could be a significant advantage. Furthermore, in addition to those tax advantages, donors may use or clients may use different vehicles for the reasons that private foundations, when you establish them, they do have to be mission focused. So if donors, clients want to give outside of their private foundation's mission, a donor-advised fund could potentially allow them the flexibility to do so. For instance, if the private foundation is focused on education and the family wants to give to religious causes or other social causes, then they can use the donor-advised fund to potentially complement the giving that they're doing from their foundation. In addition to that, many of the donors I'm working with have told me that anonymity is important. Why is anonymity important? Well, it could be because they don't want to be solicited by these organizations year after year. They're committed to them, they just don't want to receive mailers and solicitations all the time. Sometimes they just want to be recognized for the gift that they made, and they don't want to be publicized all over the newsletters and publications. So with that said, the private foundation does allow for a strategic giving vehicle, so donors can give through the private foundation effectively, but those private foundation disclosures in the form of a IRS Form 990 PF are full public disclosures that are available on guidestar.org. So what's thought to be private may not necessarily be private. So when donors want to be truly anonymous, they may leverage a donor-advised fund to be able to give in a very anonymous way. So those are just some reasons why donors are using multiple vehicles to give more effectively.
I hear a lot about foundations through the news media, And it's good to know that clients have options as if they want to be quiet about their granting. And also, a few years ago, I gave money to the SPCA on behalf of my dog, and only 6 months later, my dog ended up receiving mail. So you bring up some very valid points on the reasons why you would want to use a donor-advised fund in lieu of a private foundation. Now, can SSB go from a private foundation to a donor-advised fund or from a donor-advised fund to a private foundation, Keita?
So the grant could be made from the private foundation to the donor-advised fund. However, the donor-advised fund, in most cases, wouldn't be able to make a grant over to the private non-operating foundation. So non-operating foundations, just so everyone's aware on the call, private non-operating foundations are typically purely grant-making organizations funded by maybe one or two individuals of the family. Whereas on the opposite side, you have a private operating foundation, and those are organizations that are or private foundations that are structured more as a program-related organization. So they're actually running programs similar to the programs that a public charity like the American Red Cross may be running. So private operating foundations, because they run programs and they aren't majority grant-making organizations, they are treated like public charities. So those types of private foundations are ones that donor-advised funds, in many cases, can give to. But private non-operating foundations, which we see as the more common private foundation structure, is one that donor-advised funds typically cannot give to.
Excellent. Thank you. And Frank, in your experience, when have you chosen to use a private foundation in lieu of a donor-advised fund or vice versa, as well as maybe some of the charitable trusts that are also out there, like charitable lead trusts or charitable remainder trusts?
So actually, when I met Keita for the first time, we had a client who had a very large business that was very successful, but he also had a significant portfolio outside of the business. He'd built up a very nice portfolio that he could live on very well with his family. So he decided to contribute his entire company to a donor-advised fund. And as Keita mentioned, and I think this warrants, repeating because it took me a while to really get my head wrapped around this, but so he gets the full market value of that asset by contributing it to the donor-advised fund. Whereas, had he established a private family foundation, he would only get the cost basis allocation, the tax benefit there. So not only does he get the full market value contribution, but instead of having to sell his business on the open market, and let's say he pays 20% capital gains tax and gets 80 cents on the dollar, he's contributing 100 cents of value to a foundation. So that was really, we'd had donor-advised fund accounts before, but that was really the first time we had done that what they, I guess, Fidelity's groups call their complex asset contribution group. And so we worked with them subsequently to that transaction several times. And as I mentioned, when we're dealing with entrepreneurs who are about to have a liquidity event, if you can come to them and say, hey, let's contribute some private equity, before this deal happens, and oftentimes it needs to be, months in advance. It can't be the day before. But I have found this group to be very impressive that you can contribute private equity before, and similarly, you're getting a greater bang for your buck. You're getting the full value of the contribution, the market value, plus you're not paying capital gains tax. So that's a big reason to use a donor-advised fund. The second reason is, as just to reiterate, I think it's warranted, is the anonymity component. When I first got in this business, I would pour through the foundation records and back into someone's net worth by what they contributed to a private family foundation. If someone had a $10 million family foundation, well, they were probably worth $100 to $200 million. And that was someone I wanted to call on and badger, that's just the reality of life. So I think the anonymity component is also a big variable. The other thing is just ease of use. The donor-advised fund, it's just incredibly easy to manage. You essentially just contribute the asset, set up the structure, you call up your person, they write the check, and as long as it's qualifies as a 501c3, you're good to go. And so the management is very low. You also don't have an annual 5% contribution requirement. So, I mean, there's a lot of positives to it. That being said, the private family foundation side, I think some people just like the absolute control. They want to know that they're not contributing it today. They want their name on it, and some families we've found they want it to almost serve as almost sort of a family business or enterprise. And we've seen in the past where you establish a big family foundation where maybe you have a son or daughter that's really going to be what their career ends up being, is to run that foundation almost as a family business. Mm-hmm. So those are the two things I've found over my experience that have been the big differentiators. But we've used both, and as Keita said, we've had private family foundations that then have contributed to donor advised funds. So there's some flexibility there.
Absolutely. What about the cost? One of our listeners had typed in a question saying the cost of a private foundation to set up. Have you received any experience in that discussion?
Well, I'm happy to take that one. I think, the discussions that I've had, and I don't have exact figures around it, but, you always hear about what's the magic number to open up a private foundation. Is it $1 million of investable assets? Is it $5 million? Is it $10 million? I guess my answer to that is that there isn't really a magic number. It's really, what does the donor want to do with their philanthropy? What does the client want to achieve? What does the family want to achieve? And so I think by asking that question up front, then you're able to get to a more effective solution of, is it a private foundation that's the most effective for you? Is it a donor advised fund? Is it a trust vehicle? So, for example, the discussions that I've had in the past or with the donors I work with are around, sort of taking a step back. This one donor that I work with inherited a private foundation from his father and just felt obligated to carry on that legacy. But as he was trying to engage his own family in taking over the private foundation, he realized the challenge in trying to engage them. First of all, the kids, 4 of them, were just disinterested in the family foundation's mission. They were just disconnected from it. And so to try to engage them in something that they were disconnected from didn't make sense. So the father's plan to potentially employ them through the private foundation was something that didn't look so clear at this point in his life. So really what he started to do was look at, all right, what do I need to do to engage them more, get them interested? So then it started to become a conversation about, let's incorporate a different vehicle into this. And a donor advised fund is really easy to set up. It's not like, you have to set up a new business or, worry so much about the legal risks. It's really about, hey, let's let the donor advised fund sponsor open up the account for us. Let me contribute some money into it, just like I would any public charity, and let's see how this works. It could start with a $5,000 contribution, for example. Well, in this case, the patriarch of the family decided to open up a donor advised fund for each of his 4 children when they turned 30. At that point, he ended up transferring in $1 million for each of them to use. What they did was they started to get more involved in their own brand of philanthropy. The kids started to get involved in things like impact investing, really starting to understand the philanthropic landscape, doing site visits on their own, rolling up their sleeves and conducting their own due diligence and figuring out what are the most effective organizations in a certain space or a subspace. All of a sudden, they became really interested in philanthropy. And that was something that was really exciting to the patriarch of this family. And so I guess my long story here, Steve, to answer your question is, it's not really about the cost of the vehicle. It's how effective can the vehicle be in helping the client to achieve their objectives. And I think that's the main thing here.
Excellent. Well, that's always great to hear, how you're effectively engaging in these conversations about the goals. Might you just be able to touch upon the private donor group at Fidelity Charitable, and who do you typically work with?
Sure. Well, the private donor group at Fidelity Charitable is designed to support our most generous donors at Fidelity Charitable. So it's donors who have $1 million or more in their donor advised fund accounts, and through the private donor group, they receive a dedicated relationship manager as well as a dedicated private donor group service team. The relationship manager is focused on really understanding the values, what's important to the client, and then helping them to achieve those objectives in philanthropy. The private donor group service team is there to support the transactions to make sure that the donor and the client of yours is most well supported. And if it's a family, that the entire family is well supported through grants, contributions to fund their account, updating their successors and legacy plans. So really the private donor group was designed to provide world-class service and a world-class experience for Fidelity Charitable's most generous donors.
Thank you. And how often do you typically will talk to the whole family, or do you have and get a lot of phone calls from the next generation of these people who are setting up these accounts?
Yeah, in fact, I just had a conversation recently with a patriarch of the family that I work with in Dallas, Texas. This patriarch has been, he has 3 children. 2 of them are college age. One of them is just about to enter college. And he actually asked me to sit in on their family meeting. So they meet 4 times a year, once a quarter. Their big meeting, it typically happens in Thanksgiving. Well, he asked me to actually come off cycle to really meet with the family while they're in town and to help them understand how the donor advised fund works, how it can be an effective giving vehicle in the midst of the children having busy lives with college work, the father having a busy life with his business, and the mother having a busy life with her business as well. So it was really a discussion about not only just the donor advised fund, it was how can we help you to be most effective and how can we help you to achieve your overall objectives. And I think through that discussion, it helped to bring the family together to understand what is most important to them. And for the 2 children who are in college, it was really interesting to hear their perspectives. And I think the parents were a little surprised to hear how much of a global view the children have now than they did when they were living at home. So now they're really interested in things like human trafficking, in topics such as water. They just couldn't believe that there were people in the world who didn't have access to clean water. Or environmental causes, clean tech, renewables. These are all areas in which we started to have a discussion that the parents were just so pleased with because they never really felt like the children had a philanthropic identity. But these types of discussions, Steve, aren't uncommon for me and my colleagues in the private donor group because we're constantly having conversations with not only our donors but their extended families as well.
Absolutely, and I think it's very important to understand the flexible vehicles that are available to your clients so that you can really kind of meet the needs and bring them down that philanthropic journey. Now, Frank, I'm hearing a lot, and I think we're always being inundated by the different generations that are out there, the baby boomers, Gen X, the millennials. Now, have you found a very way of kind of being able to balance the communication styles between these generations that has worked for you and your team there at UBS?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I'm a very proud Gen Xer myself. I am doing my best to understand millennials. I have a 13-year-old right now that I'm literally at the point now where I'm probably going to hand him my cell phone to fix it and do what I need to be done. So I've officially crossed over. But, you know, so I mentioned this UBS conference I was at recently, and there was a breakout session where they're talking about team structuring, and one of the principals talked about how they've created a position on their team where they've hired someone literally whose sole job it is to engage with the next generation. Because she was probably my age, she was probably, you know, mid-40s, maybe a little bit older, but they hired, you know, a 25-year-old or they had a 25-year-old on the team, and they said, this is your job. You know, we don't want to lose 98% of this business because we don't speak the language. And so, You know, I think candidly, I don't think our team has done a very good job of engaging in dialogue with that next gen like we should be. And so I don't know if we're going to embark upon that kind of structural change, or if, you know, I think the answer is I don't know. But I will say that, I mean, we obviously recognize it's very important. We all, you know, as it pertains to philanthropy, we are, I mean, I will say this is far and away the vehicle that we've used to engage the next generation. And it's been brought about oftentimes by the patriarch, matriarch who've said, hey, we want to engage the kids and we want to have financial education. How do we do it? And we said, well, you know, we can take them to New York and talk them through a 101. But another way to do it is, and this is a broader discussion of, you know, letting the kids know how much money mom and dad have, is you start with a foundation and talk about, hey, we have a foundation that has $10 million in it or $5 million in it. That's a little inclination to the kids that, you know, mom and dad have some money somewhere. And let's talk about, we're not consumers of this, we are stewards. And you start to reframe the issue for the kids. The other thing, just to, you know, we were talking about tips earlier. One of the things I've found is you also are going to find first-generation wealth creators might not be the most philanthropically inclined because they're bootstrappers. One of the things we found is, as much as they may be dismissive of philanthropy, when you start talking about taxes and saving money, all of a sudden they'll get a little bit more interested. And so another example of something that you can work with their tax counsel is if they have a monetization event or a high-income event year, you can say, look, how much are you giving away each year? Well, we give away $10,000. Okay, well, then let's preload the next 5 to 10 years. Let's make a donor advised fund for $100,000 this year, and then you just dispense it over the next 5 to 10 years. But let's use that deduction in this year that we know we've had a big income event. So that's just one extra tip that I thought might be valuable to some of the advisors on the call.
No, absolutely. I really appreciate, and I love that stewardship of advisors to making sure that you're looking after your client's best interest, and how it really plays into the holistic wealth planning model, that it really kind of is always evolving, but we're always looking for that new ways in which that we can generate. Now, Keita, you have in the private donor group has a next-gen offering. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. We just had our Next Generation Fellows program. It was up in Boston, and it brought together the next generation of our donor families that we work with. Next generation clients in the range of 18 to 35 years old, some even older than that, but they are still the next generation. Really what we're trying to do here is engage them more, to at least have an idea of what they want to accomplish with their philanthropy, how they can play a role in that, and empower them to make a difference. So this is just one way in which we're really helping to engage the next generation, but we also offer resources on our website as well, you know, tips, articles, white papers, and case studies around how you might be able to engage the next generation, because we realize that this is a significant opportunity for many of you on the phone.
Excellent, thank you. Now, Frank, I want to talk about the importance of actually choosing the right asset to give to fund their philanthropy. Now, have you seen situations that, or worked with a family that they've leveraged a unique asset? And how do you really identify those situations where these types of assets would make the most impact for their philanthropy?
Well, I was just seeing a thing about Bitcoin. That's the future, in my opinion. We're just going to contribute Bitcoin. No, I'm just kidding. You know, it depends.
We can accept that.
I think it's up 10% today, by the way. You know, as I mentioned, we had a client who contributed his entire company. We have talked with clients about they're about to have a monetization event, contributing secondary or you know, private equity. Those are complex. Those require a lot of lead time and counsel, but they are very effective. So that's that's one way to think about it. Another is, as I mentioned, highly appreciated low basis stock. That's another good asset to contribute. Try to think of anything other than that. I mean, typically those are the two things that we start with. People can contribute art. I mean, there's a lot of things nowadays that people can contribute if you have the other side of the table can process that and value it. But I'd say it's typically the company stock or just highly appreciated equity.
Now, do you ever see the situation where you have someone that might be worth a very staggering figure, but yet say $10 million, but they only have $7 million of liquidity, and saying that what do you have on the other side of the wall, that illiquid wall, that might be an instance in which we can use that asset to fund their philanthropy?
I mentioned, typically what we'll see is the illiquid side is their private business. And so we can't have that dialogue. Or like I said, you can have art or some other complex asset. That's part of that initial dialogue as to really figuring out what's across the asset base. Like I said, we're trying to be holistic and really find out what are the assets, what are the liabilities for this exact reason. But I would say, and this is a broader commentary, but I think, for people on the phone, I think our business is becoming more and more commoditized on a daily basis. And so the more you can differentiate yourself, the better. And this is one vehicle that I just feel like is low-hanging fruit that is immediately valuable to the client. It differentiates you from the typical advisor out there. And so, like I said, the more you can talk about the holistic side, the both sides of the balance sheet, the better.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that as well, I will say that, I guess several years ago, when you asked a donor about have they considered a privately held or a liquid asset, a business interest, like I had mentioned, privately held C Corp, privately held S Corp, an LLC interest or an LP interest, they may not have even considered giving this to charity. I mean, the thought of even giving appreciated stock directly to a charity was not even in the minds of donors. So, we realized that there was a significant opportunity here to really help our donors in being more effective and more strategic with their giving. And so, we really put a lot of effort into making sure that there's resources out there to assist advisors, putting you in the driver's seat so that you can have that conversation with your clients and leverage Fidelity Charitable or the Donor Advised Fund as an extension of your office to really help in those conversations. So if you want to have, let's say, a complex asset attorney, hop on the phone with your client just to have a discussion about, does it make sense to give this privately held asset that I have? I've got so much of my, net worth tied up in this asset. I never even thought about giving it to charity, but let's give it a shot. Let's see if it's worth it. And if it doesn't make sense, then, we can let you know, and then we go on our merry way. And we still feel like it's a winning conversation if we can help the client realize that, hey, there was this potential asset that you could have given to fund your future philanthropy.
Yes, I agree, and I think it's worth noting that Fidelity Charitable has an in-house team of attorneys by training that will help and work with those clients as well as the advisor to help facilitate the sale of this asset at no additional cost to the client. So they'll help monetize this asset at a right time, so therefore they can use this to fund their philanthropy. Yeah, last year alone, we had between 900 and 1,000 conversations with prospective donors about these types of assets. And last year, we accepted over 450 as donations into these donor advised funds. So it really makes sense, and we can help them through the process. So, Frank, I want to talk to you a little bit about the testamentary options. Do you have clients who might not have a spouse or a next generation, and does vehicles like the Donor Advised Fund or maybe some other vehicles really make sense for that kind of situation?
That's a good question. I'll be candid. Typically, most of the situations we have involve a spouse or children. But I think it does. I think, if nothing else, I think it's worth the dialogue to, like I said, as I said earlier, to kind of get to the bigger discussions of what are we ultimately trying to achieve here. And, it can, to some degree be involved in the estate planning discussion for sure, whether assuming that the client broaches the, $5.25 million if it was an individual. But, yeah, I think it's worthwhile. But, I'll be honest, candidly, most of the time we're dealing with some heir or some, spouse or something like that.
Probably some situation which they really know where they want to send that. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, Steve, and if it's okay, yes. I can just add on to that as well, because there are certainly donors that I work with who have told me we don't have kids, but the nonprofit that they support or nonprofits that they support are part of their family. So, this is something that I've seen as well, through the discussions I've had, and it just, I guess, hits on the point that it's important to understand what's valuable to the client, what's valuable to their families. And if you don't ask those questions, you just never know. And so I think that's just something I've uncovered through the conversations I've had. It's not trying to solve for any problems. It's really asking the questions to get them to really think about, hey, how can I be more effective? How can I achieve my objectives? And, for these families who are saying, hey, I don't have kids, but, the charities that I support are my passion, that's really where the value is. They may have successful careers in business. They may be private equity, venture capital, hedge fund managers, and they're taking risks in their day-to-day lives. But when it comes to philanthropy, something that could be the most valuable thing to them, they want to go full speed, and maybe they don't want to take any risks in that space. They want all the money to go to charity. And so it's really important to then have those conversations with the client to find out what is most important to them.
That's awesome. That's great. Keita, Frank, really, I want to thank you both really for the time this afternoon. I think we've had a great discussion, had a lot of great conversations from our listeners, which I think it's very impactful and great that we ended up getting so many. So, the insights, the stories, the best practices were extremely helpful. We are still getting some great questions as well as some feedback for follow-up after the call. A few final reminders. If you asked a question today that we did not get to, someone from Fidelity Charitable will definitely be following up in the next few days. The survey and the CE form were shared via chat box a few moments ago, and it will automatically pop up when we officially conclude. You can access it in our follow-up email as well. Please tell us how we did so we can continue to evolve our educational offerings. A portion of what we talked about today, complex assets, that's going to be our next webinar, and it's slated for January 22nd. So please mark your calendars. In the 25 years that Fidelity Charitable has been doing this and helping donors give more to charity and turning those taxable gains into charitable gains, we've accepted over $3.5 billion in these types of donations. So I think it would be very impactful if you join in on January 22nd. And finally, you've heard some great information from Frank Hogan at UBS. Thank you, as well as Keita Matsumoto. We really appreciate it. But I know that every situation out there is unique. So Fidelity Charitable has a team of specialists specifically to answer a lot of these questions. All you have to do is give us a call. We can help you out with the what, the why, and the how of charitable planning. We can make it easy for you and your client to really do this smart philanthropy. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for taking the time to join us today on this webinar. We hope you join us again in our future events, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you.